There we go. Okay, cool. Mimi, so why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me what you're doing currently as a designer, as a creative, and what you would like to be doing potentially.
Yeah. So I kind of switched careers maybe like 2-ish years ago. um I was working in art museum education for like 5 or 6 years. And then I started doing illustration kind of on the side in like 2020. I had always been interested in design. Kind of funny story. I like started my undergrad as a graphic design major, but knew nothing about it, and had a really bad experience with a teacher who like told me that I should do something else with my life. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. Cause I was like, 19 and didn't know anything. And 10 years later, I'm like back trying to do it. So left the museum world, moved to Chicago from Florida, and I was like kind of freelancing-ish while working other jobs, and then last summer got a junior designer position and left that position in January and have been freelancing since then. So now I'm freelancing for movement gyms part-time, which is like a climbing gym that has like locations all over the country. And I'm also freelancing for a company in Chicago called World's Finest Chocolate. It's like school fundraiser chocolate, if you've ever seen it. So it's like it's kind of more so like a pre-press production artist kind of type gig. All like packaging related for the most part, really technical stuff. So that's what I'm doing work-wise. I would love to be not freelancing. I would love to be like somewhere full-time. My like dream job, I think, would be still within like the food and beverage packaging world. Like I think my dream job would be working either for like a small creative like studio that focuses on that kind of work, or like in-house for I don't know. I love like beer beer brewery design, but like kind of open to lots of things. But definitely interested in packaging. Um, yeah. And also it would be cool to utilize some of my illustration skill. I think a lot of times I get like pigeonholed a bit, like you're an illustrator. That's what you do. So I'm trying to like up the design chops.
Sure. Okay. Where are you? So you want to go full time. You'd like to have a little security,
Yeah.
a little less, up and down, up and down. I get it. Where would you say this is like, where's the bottleneck here? What are you doing now outside, like you're freelancing? Yes. I get a sense of your background. I've looked a little bit about your work. Where is the struggle? I mean, I also get that goes without saying that freelance is a struggle. I get that part. So like what is the thing that you think that you are kind of just either fumbling or just not getting, or it's just like not connecting?
I think like the work on my website needs work.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it I did quickly because I was like job searching and like put some personal projects up that weren't totally like, I didn't feel were finished, but I was like, I gotta get it up kind of thing.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think because a lot of times I'm like, oh, I don't have the, super impressive like design resume per se, or like the connections. So I'm like, my work needs to like really speak for itself. And right now I don't know if it does, because I'm applying to jobs like practically every day. And, I'm like, I'm sure it's a factor of things, but um yeah, I feel like maybe it's my work or um I don't know. It's kind of like uh, I'm trying to find that thing that's gonna like give me that like leg up or that like edge or
Sure. Do
yeah.
you how are you applying to jobs right now? Like what are you sending? How are you sending them? Like
Um
what's that process like for you at the moment?
I guess it's kind of a mix of things. Like some places are like emailing them my website and my resume and like a little blurb about me and why I'm interested. Sometimes I'll go through like LinkedIn and look for jobs there. Sometimes I'll just like look up places that I would want to work and see what they're hiring for.
Mhm. What have you considered like applying to like big brands? I mean, for example, like PepsiCo is out of Chicago. They have a Chicago office. And when you say snack and beverage, that's like immediately where my mind goes.
Mm.
Um, I would potentially consider opening up the search a bit. One, because there are a lot of big brands that would, you know, probably be really happy to have someone that can do both illustration and design, like kind of like what your work is showing a bit. I worked at PepsiCo for 3 years, and I remember working with a ton of designers that were very much like kind of aligned with what you're saying. Like you do illustration, you have design chops, you can combine the two, and that like kind of fits really nicely in a world of, making snack and beverage brands,
Mm.
especially when they're trying to reinvent packaging or they're trying to um come up with a new brand or something like that. So, consider one, opening up your, what is in your radar. Now, obviously, PepsiCo is one of the biggest brands in the world. It comes with a lot of um way of navigating a large company like that, a Fortune 50 company that is global, that has many layers and many thousands of employees. So that's definitely something to consider. But again, I think of it in your situation of like probably one of the best places to get experience. Not only as a designer, as a, from a skill level, but also from a career level. As much, I worked 3 years there. I did about two different roles in that time, and I cannot tell you how valuable that experience was. Granted, sure, like I was eventually sick and tired of the business politics, and um it was definitely a slog the last year and a half, going up a hill, talking to people you don't want to talk to. And this was all pretty much during the pandemic, but like having the like, hey, how was your weekend? And like that's gonna happen at any sort of like job, especially if I was at the end of my like career anyway as a full-time. So that's one thing. But again, like the experience I learned, the people I met um were invaluable. I just chatted with my creative director from who I worked with there the other day, and like talking about projects, talking about like things that he needs help with, stuff like that. I talked to people. I worked with someone while I was there who's now at like a climate control company, and we're talking about working together on that project. So like you can't like I would never say to overlook those jobs. I would never recommend to just like completely put that out of your field of view, because the experience learned, the people that you meet there are just absolutely invaluable in something like that. With that said, let's take a look at your portfolio. I started clicking around here, and just like first glance, what I would say is excuse me, some of this stuff is good. I just think like for example, the one thing that, so I didn't click into these, I clicked into this one. So for something like this packaging says a lot. This packaging is like, ooh, exciting, colorful, bright, textural. And then I click into it and I don't get enough of those elements of like, that's what I can view here. Like you go from this kind of like nice image to something completely different. And so what I like to recommend for a lot of people is like, try to get as many assets, or like not necessarily assets, but like, this is one image of the packaging that I got really excited about. I want to see more of this. I want to see like the typography. I want to see like the illustration in full. Like, can it be a pattern? Can it be applied to other stuff? I want to see like versions of these assets. Like this is a project that you're kind of, I'm guessing there's some similarities here. Like this coffee mark is also on this here. Can you expand some of this stuff to not only talk about like this idea of Goose Island Bourbon County Stout collaboration, but like, can you kind of talk about it as like a brand campaign or like a collaboration project, not so much only about the packaging, not so much only about the product, right? Like each of these labels are different, like what went into the color choices or the design or the layout, like how do they change from flavor to flavor? And like you could do that just for this, and then you could do that just for this, and then you could do that potentially for these. Like I see what you're doing here. Like here is a stout, I guess. Yeah, like here's stout coffee, here's stout beer, right? Cool. Now like you're getting into like the kind of like cultural collaborations of like Blink-182. Awesome. Again, can you just like maybe do three, one more, get one more in there. Think of them as like, lead singer, co-singer, Travis Barker, and then merch. Merch is like, for me, like merch is merch, like it's every designer feels the need and loves to just like throw in a sweater and stuff like that. That's great. I never talk about like, oh, you need to really expand on these. I think if anything though, perhaps like finding a couple of mocks slightly different, maybe a little bit higher quality, I guess, but these are fine. Like worry about expanding on this stuff first, because this is the work right here. And this is the stuff that you want to focus on. So I would definitely consider that. And also like, even just like a minor note of like these backgrounds, right? Like they're somewhat different. You're like kind of getting into like, you're kind of getting there where like, this is a different project and then this changes slightly and this is different, right? And now it's just like, what I'm looking for is more kind of like that presentation of like the process of the elements of like all those little bits and pieces that make this a thing.
Right.
Celebrating the historic creation of Dark Matter and Goose Island team to create. Cool. I mean that's fine. Something that I like to like as you begin to consider expanding some of these images, expanding on that presentation aspect. Something I like to think about is, you could leave this as is. That's fine. What I think helps is like for every image that you have, there should be almost like a bit of context, kind of like what you're doing with this Blink 182, right? So if you decide to like have an image of just that, illustrative pattern, right? Like I would want to personally, I'd want to include a bit of text that says like, this was inspired by this, or, these colors came from here, things like that. Like, it's just nice to have those pieces because again, if you're sending your website as your portfolio in these applications, people are going to come, they're going to scroll through really quickly, boom, 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 right? And they're going to, until they hit the bottom of the page. So I like to think of it as like, okay, when people land on this page, how do I slow them down? How do I grab their attention? How do I like get them to really walk through these things that I've worked really hard on? And like, that is always the challenge, I think, with a portfolio website is like, how do I make it so people just don't click on something, scroll through it. If nothing catches their eye, they're on to the next one.
Right.
The one thing I would say, so illustration, let's click into here. Yeah, I would avoid doing stuff like this. Now, okay, I've thought about this a lot because I get heat on TikTok about this of like people are like, oh, it depends on what you're applying for, having, different skills and having them categorized. Like, I don't believe that. I believe it's distracting to have too many things, like in the sense of like, here's design, here's illustration, here's photography. If anything, like I just like throw them in all as one, What I would say though here, like what you're doing is I think you need to be really intentional about what it is you want to show, because the problem that I see is like your design work has the like context and descriptions. Your illustration work doesn't, right? So it doesn't really go as like very far to like you're not doing yourself a favor by just throwing your illustrations up there. You could do that a million different ways that would be a better way of presenting it. Like I always recommend, like if this is the case, this is more like a blog to me, like this is where you're just like, here's an image that I made, and some of them you have these things, some of them you don't, right? So I would think about like, okay, is there something here for Grandma's Kitchen that I can like talk about and put this as a project rather than, and also again, like personally, like I don't like separate things as design and illustration. Like I let the work talk for itself to say like, like basically you want people to ask you questions like, hey, did you make that illustration? Yes, I did. Like I also laid out the type. I also laid out this. I also laid out that. So like, that's why I'm never like advocating to like separate out your quote unquote skill sets by these like little categories, because like I want everything. I make everything, I do photo, I do illustration, I do design, I do all this stuff. And I just have it all in one way. And so that, when they see the work, they can ask the question of like, hey, did you actually come up with that? And if I did, awesome. If not, if I worked with someone else, great. But like at the end of the day, it's all kind of like getting their attention and getting them to understand like what I'm capable of. So think about like, for this stuff that you want to show as illustration, are there any projects in here that you can pull together in a more like formal sort of quote unquote case study way, expose a lot of like process, what you were thinking, how you worked with the client, whatever. And if not, I would consider combining these as, a projects page, and then potentially at the bottom, you have a 2-up grid here, maybe have a 3-up or a 4-up grid of just like all of your, one-off pieces that you worked on. Because I mean, I come here and it's not like I don't understand that you've made this, like that's the assumption. It's on your portfolio. I'm assuming you made it. And if not, I'm going to ask you the question and you're going to tell me. Right. So like that is already doing, like the work is already doing that. Like I'm going to assume you came up with this. I'm going to assume you came up with this, all the colorful and brightness. Like I don't need to have it separated out to know like, oh, this is graphic design and this is illustration. What's a project in here besides this one that I should click on?
Maybe the second one.
This one, okay. Tell me
This
about this project.
this is one of the personal projects that I put up that I'd like to expand on. And it was me just playing with the idea. I've never like done a full like branding project. So this was me trying to play with like coming up with logo and choosing typefaces and, you know, color palette. I really like clowns, so wanted to play on that theme. And I've gotten some feedback about like that sticker mock-up being like more interesting than like the logo that I currently have, and kind of changing that aspect of it, you know, maybe making that like clown face the O of clown. Um
Who's
or
told you that so far?
who told me that?
Yeah.
I did a portfolio review through AIGA a couple weeks ago at like the beginning of the
Mhm.
month, and I met with like 3 different people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That does sound like a very AIGA thing to say. Like, hey, everything that you made is cool, but like this thing is the most interesting.
Mm.
But I would, you know, like I come from that same vein, so I would also agree that this catches you, right? Like this is a cool exploration of like what the brand could feel like, how the brand could like sound outside of some of these materials. And I think it would be interesting to see like how do you work more of this into this? Because I will say this, like there is some things here that you're doing well. I think there's some minor things here that are just like, you know, you'll learn with experience. Like, for example, you don't need to give a stroke to this on, you know, there's enough contrast there to get that. And I think like those are just kind of tiny mistakes that we end up making, unless like, unless the stroke is intentionally like throughout the rest of it, you know, like it's here, but it's not like on this element or these elements, you know, like these are all just like small little unifying moments that you need to be more intentional with, right? Like if I'm adding a stroke here, then should everything be a stroke, or is there a rule where just the shapes are a stroke because that pushes them forward more? You know, these are kind of like things that you want to think about. Um, the packaging is good. Like I say that in that way because like I'm already starting to think like, what if this was the packaging, you know, like what if that got crazy on here or something? Um, but like you're doing the right thing here, right? You're like curious about coming up with a brand and going through the exercise yourself and trying to figure out like how does that process take form, take
Right.
shape. And what I would do though is I would like reference some like really good branding studios and like take note of how they present the work, because you know, like moments like this are like the beginning of a brand guideline, or like a beginning of like how you expose like here are all the elements we created and here are all the colors and these are the fonts we're using, right? um I think like here, you know, it's like, hey, we use Bilwy light, medium, condensed, and bold, you know, like great. We don't need to like, we don't need to show it like that.
Yeah.
Um, I think I like to reference, I don't want to be a, oops, what's going on? Whoa. I don't like to be, I'm not doing this to show off, but I do like to reference the way I've done typography at times, because you know, we as designers, we love a moment of like a type guide and like a breakdown of the typography. Like it's in our veins, right? And like this was for me, like when I saw brand guidelines, like this always kind of like stuck with me or resonated with me a bit. Like if you're showing, like this is all one family of typeface, right? Cool, great. You know, there's a moment that tells you that, and then I'm like exposing how it's used, or what it's going to look like in kind of context, versus like, here's just a bunch of headlines, or like typeface names. Let me go back really quickly. Let me just find my portfolio. Here we go. Share screen. So I think that's something to think about. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely some like, the other project that comes to mind is I think it's by Jeff Perky, Boardwalk Beer. Yeah. This project comes to mind for me. So I love Jeff Perky. He has a studio, I think, in Tennessee called Perky Brothers. It's basically just him and his team. But I learned about him when I was graduating school, and he made some awesome work. He still does. But I just remember like finding his work and thinking like, wow, this guy has like a nice, really small studio. He makes some really cool looking design. And the way he presents his work also, I think, is great. Like, the reason why I think of this project is because you have this element of like a mascot, you have this like character that's yours, and the way he presents the project, and all of the different elements. And I think you could kind of benefit from an approach like this, where let's just click into here, where like, again, you're exposing these elements rather than trying like one at a time, rather than trying to fit them all in one slide like you're doing on your site right now. Like, here's the logo, here's like a version of the beer, here's the label, like here's all the different elements and stuff like that. He like, this is a great, this was like an awesome brand, and he got to work on a lot of cool stuff. But like a different way of presenting some of this stuff. Now, I don't think any of these are really like mocks that you can, like, obviously there are studios, so they would go ahead and do this, but you can find mocks similar to this that will kind of give it that little bit of, context and kind of life, like kind of feeling. Let's see if we can go to the website and see how it presents on the website. Yeah, I've referenced Perky Brothers a ton of times. Oh, look at that. They did a Patagonia project. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Does he have it on here anymore? What? No. Okay, so he's updated his website. It's not there anymore. Anyway, but I'll send this over as a reference anyway. But yeah, like, just a really great designer, and someone that I like looked at when I was younger, as like, that's the kind of work I want to achieve. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the same for you, but again, in that same vein of like, what is the quality, or what is like the echelon of work, that bar that I want to achieve? And that's someone who I reference. And I think it's always really important to kind of find those people for you, like whether it's an illustrator, whether it's a designer. It's just something to kind of like give you a grounding of like, I love this work. This is what excites me. And this is like the stuff I want to be doing. And so I need to figure out, how do I practice and get better to be able to kind of create that output.
Yeah.
Any other project we should click into?
The movement stuff is more so like, those two in the middle there, I just wanted to show like the more kind of promo practical type things, like working with an already existing brand.
Okay.
It's not really
Uh
necessarily exciting.
let me see this. what is this? Why is that there?
Oh, that was from a PDF template. That's where like a QR code. Or
Okay. So potentially either make it purple, make it match, or put the QR code. Same thing with some of this stuff. Like either get rid of it. It's just a distraction. Now, for something like this, right, where you want to show that you are working with a brand or you're working with a pre-existing company and they have like sort of these guardrails in, right? I would think of it this way. Movement is a client, right? You're working with them on many different things. Potentially combine these into one, right? Movement gyms, right? Combine these into one. And again, I'm talking a lot about branding and stuff because I think that is, to me, the branding, like snack and beverage design is at a core branding, I think. And so, let me know if like I'm totally talking off base of like what you want to potentially be doing. But like I would look at these combine these two projects and look at it from a branding perspective, because again, like, yes, you're working within their guidelines or their logo or whatever, like, they're telling you like, hey, we use Montserrat because like we're like, that's what we chose because we want to be friendly, whatever. Great. But like, that is fine. Like, this is all Lorem Ipsum as well. So, like, I'm not really getting much from this. But what you did is come up with this like intricate, pattern for summer or whatever, like this is that moment that you want to talk about. Not so much like, hey, I can lay text out, I can like create a poster and a flyer and social media ads. Sure, that's great. But your work was in coming up with this. And I think that is the thing that you want to talk about. Like, you want to talk about like, yeah, this was for their summer, their spring, promotion. We wanted to bring the outdoors inside a climbing gym, and I came up with this geometric pattern. Now, this might have been like all they asked you for, but for something like this is a really cool pattern. I think this is lovely. How do we like make more of this, right? Like, can we apply it to some cool bags? Can we make a shirt out of this? Can we, like, that's where, yes, they told you all I needed was this, and that's where you stopped, but it doesn't have to be that. You can continue to build on this project. And I think that would make this more of like a thing that I'd want to look through and read and just learn more about. The other thing too, I would think is like, I don't feel the need to say like, here are flyers and here is social, let the work come through. It's very clear. And also like when you're like, if you're putting in a phone, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm guessing these are supposed to be stories. And so what I would push you to do is like, I think this layout needs some work, right? Day of week is like, this is left line, this is centered. Think about that. Does the typography need to be in Helvetica when this is clearly like Montserrat, bold or black or whatever? And can you push this a little bit more? But then also like be, again, a little bit more intentional with like how you're going to present this. Like, this is clearly a dead account of, Instagram. Like, bring this to life. Like, show me an Instagram account, show me an Instagram story. So that makes it really clear of what that is. Flyers, these to me are just artboards on a page. Grab a mock-up that is like a poster on a wall or somewhere and, put that in there. And then also, consider putting some live text in here too, because immediately as soon as I see the first lorem ipsum, it throws me off. I'm like, okay, this is really just an exercise that you handed to them, or this was just like a task you handed to them and they went ahead and did everything. And then since we're talking about combining these two, like, present it as like, this is a client that I work with, that's like your first thing. Like, I work with blah, 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 because of this, and this. I also have a passion in climbing or whatever. Great. Then, talk about like each project or each sort of like quote unquote campaign in that order, in chronological order, and show like, yeah, for this summer promo, we did this vibe. For this promo, we did this vibe. You don't need to, like, unless like you're trying to present that like Destination Summer is a brand, it's kind of like a brand moment or like a campaign moment that is still using like the movement logo, but we expanded into a bunch of different applications. Like, you don't really need a moment of this like color palette and key art. You could like again, if how I showed you Jeff Perky, right, like that Boardwalk Brewery, like in those images there is no this idea of like, here's the key art, it's like, here's the logo. And potentially on that same slide you could have like, here are both logos, here's vertical and here's horizontal. Stuff like this throws me off, and I'm just like, cool, like, is this a type? Sure. But like, what is the big element here? It's like the logo was the big leading of this campaign, and how we applied that logo and applied their brand at the same time is more important than this moment of big orange block. Again, like mockups, they'll do you a lot better than this flatness. Excuse me. And again, I think what this is suffering from is that like you're using the same image, and that could be the case. That's fine, right? But after the first couple of times, because I see 5 of them here, 6 of them, I don't want to see it anymore. So there's 2 things. It's like, present it differently where it's a little bit slower, you're not showing a million things at once, or go and find different images, find some additional images and continue to build this out beyond what they asked you for. Okay. Any other questions or anything like that you want to go over, specific to portfolio, or just kind of like process, freelancing?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, it's like the juggle of trying to find the time, and like, yeah, I guess I'm like, it's like I'm putting these things in just as as they were needed, or like what they were asked for, but not tailoring it to like the presentation of like my website, my work.
Yeah.
So
yeah, when I did my portfolio years ago, because I haven't updated it in a while, I'm trying to think like how I started with my portfolio, because where it is today still and I think the last time I updated it was probably 2019, 2018, I think. And at the time, it was like, it was really going through, taking out the projects that like I didn't really care about, that didn't really speak to the work I had more recently worked on, and really tailoring the presentation aspect, that side of it, to people that I was going to speak to about, like recruiters and managers and stuff like that. So, it is a thing, right? Like a lot of, like you're saying, a lot of designers, a lot of creatives kind of make the mistake of like, okay, it's done, I finished this thing for a client, now I got to get it up on the website, so just let me throw images on there just to show that I have work. And I think that's wrong. Your portfolio is a presentation, it's an example of your quality of work, and the design of the portfolio itself is very much a reflection of that, of you. So like, taking the time to really tailor it, taking the time, like, and that's kind of why, if you think of it, if you ever see like a design studio, that's why I have friends now like launching their own studios. And that's why they take so long, because they know that the people that are going to be looking at this like they have an expectation, they have a level that they're looking for, because that to them also talks about like the quality of work they create and their output. And so the same thing for us smaller designers, us independents, you know, you need to take the time to really work on that presentation, really work on that layout and that sort of editorializing the work in that sense.
Yeah. I think there's also like a part of me that, like the center you showed me, the Perky Brothers, like, yeah, incredible work that I would aspire to. And part of me is like, man, I just don't know how to get there exactly. But like,
Think of it this way, you know, it's practice. It is like getting as many at bats as possible. And, you know, like on my portfolio, on my website, the first project that I have up there is actually a project that I would work on the weekends. And I did that for 3-4 years, actually. It started off as like a podcast that I launched in like 2019 or something. I was working at a company that I was working with like a bunch of different mediums. I was working with audio, I was working with video, I was working with animation. And as a designer, I had never worked in that setting. So me naturally was like, okay, cool, let me go and make my own stuff in those mediums to learn about it so that I could speak to those people that are better than me at it. And so I went through, and also, you know, it was very much a fun kind of project for me. It was a passion project, you know, and it's something that like I wanted to put out into the world. And over time, you know, I became, you know, like more confident of trying to make it a real thing. And so when you have that thought of like taking everything that you make and trying to make it as real as possible, you start to like really want to push what you can do. So you take photos, you take video, you take, you know, you create animations and stuff like that. And it's very much the same, I would say, for you as well. You know, hey, you want to aspire to make work on a beer brand like that, then go off and make a made up beer brand like you did and continue to work on it, continue to mold it. You know, you could take that clown you know, beer brand that you came up with and continue to just like, you know, work with it and feel it out and try to make it as real as possible, because I always found that really helps as well. It's like, if I'm going to put this out in the world, you know, and like share it with people, like what do they want to see, and what's actually going to convince them that this is a cool brand, and like what am I seeing within the beer industry or the brewery industry that like I think actually relates to this idea of like a made up brand about clowns, you know?
right.
It's like while you're developing the design of it, you're also developing the personality. And I think that's where like this idea of branding really starts to kind of mesh together really well and gives you a better idea of what you need to work on to make that.
Yeah. Totally.
Any other questions or anything you want to ask about or talk about?
Oh man, I feel like I could have a million, but I'm trying to think of like super key. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just gonna be about that practice and like putting the time in. Oh, that first project, my a little bit of my struggle with that one was that I don't have a lot of access to like the images of it. So I'm trying the coffee.
The dark stout. Is that real? Is that a real project?
That's a real project, yeah.
Can you go out and buy it?
Not anymore.
Okay. I mean, there's plenty of coffee bag mocks. You know,
Yeah.
there's plenty of other mocks. Like, you don't need a million different views of the packaging itself. But again, like you can expose the illustration, you can expose all these other assets in that. So, you know, I'll send over a reference for a mockup website that I think is really good as well. But After this, in about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll get an email from me that will have like I think 3 questions. The faster you can fill that out and get that back to me, that'll let me know like where I should send the recording to this recording and that document.
Okay, cool.
Alrighty, Mimi, it was lovely to meet you. You have my email. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a note, and I will speak to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Have a good one. Bye bye.